Welcome to Wellthy Living Conversations. I'm Lisa, your host and founder of Wellthy Living. It's here that I connect with a variety of wonderful people to have inspiring and insightful conversations to help you live a meaningful, connected and well life, both personally and professionally. So in today's episode, I'm speaking to two very inspiring women. So first, meet Lucy Mays. So Lucy is an award-winning leadership professional author and creative facilitator. She's a true innovator in leadership development, drawing from a rich background in law, social work, and corporate governance. Okay, so now for my second guest today, Ingrid Gaiotto. Ingrid is a multi-talented entrepreneur and hospitality expert, originally from Italy. She also is the founder of Gaiotto Tours, offering curated journeys in Italy and central Victoria. Participants are invited to share in the bounty of local makers and creators whose cultural and culinary offerings pay tribute to local expression and innovation. So two women with different pathways, both women sharing my mission of connection to self, others, and the world around us. So listen in as we chat about cultivating new ways of connecting, seeing, and being in the world. So welcome, ladies.
Hi.
Thanks, Lisa. Hi,
Thanks
everyone.
for having us.
Okay, so let's just start with each of you. If you could just tell me a little bit, or tell us all a little bit about yourself beyond the bio. And maybe if you can share a particular aha moment in your journey that's directed you to your path.
Well, hi, everyone. I'm Lucy, and we are joining you from the traditional lands of the Jara people, the Jajawaran country in central Victoria. Beyond the bio, that's just such a beautiful invitation, and I don't really know where to start, but probably the greatest hat that I wear is that of mother. I have two young adult children, 18 and 20-year-olds. And so I'm in that transitional stage of life, I suppose you could say, where I've dedicated the last 20 years to them and their thriving, and whilst also juggling my own professional life and personal life and social life and wellbeing life. But I'm really now sort of facing a new phase of my life where I feel really excited about having all the tools in my toolkit from all the many parts of that pathway and that journey that I now have a bit more freedom to bring back out into the world. So I'm really invested in and interested in, and have done a huge amount of spiritual personal development work over the years around the ripple effect, the energetic effect that we have in the world as we walk in the world, our beingness as distinct from our doingness. And I'm really committed to being able to, bring that alive a bit more strongly, I suppose, with this new kind of freedom of time that I'm going to have available to me. And I suppose a pivotal moment that I could speak to is when I was early career lawyer. I was incredibly competitive and ambitious as a young person, played the game furiously and did well at it, and got into one of Melbourne's top law firms. And then I just found myself sitting there with this unbelievable values disconnect. And it was devastating because I'd invested 6 years of time and effort in studying, and I was massively identified with, the ego association with that too. And to sort of sit there and go, oh, I've worked so hard for this, and I thought this was the big pinnacle ideal, and actually I'm going to die a spiritual death in here. And they said to me at the time, they said, when I mentioned that I'd made the decision to leave and I was going to study social work, they were like, oh, well, I knew someone with a social conscience once. They did okay for themselves. But they also said, we hired you because you are soft. In fact, those were the words they used. And I could have been offended, but I think I was inspired. I was like, good on you, because they were trying to change culture in a sector and a profession that is cutthroat. And so they're trying to recruit to this new vision of a new culture that's softer. And so they said to me, what can we do to keep people like you? What can we do differently? And at the time I was a bit young and naive and petulant, and I was like, I've got no idea, but I'm out of here. But I've come full circle many times over in my career and had many thoughts about that since. And I now work predominantly actually in healthcare with similar kind of cultural disconnect for people around bringing humanism and humanity back to the workplace for people's well-being and the efficacy of their work as well. That'll probably do. Otherwise, I'll carry on for the whole hour.
No, but I love listening. It's such a pleasure to hear all those words beautifully put together.
Yeah. Before we go on to you sharing, Ingrid, I'd like to just say thanks for sharing that with us, Luce. And I think so many people, including myself, can really resonate with that. A lot of people, especially after the last couple of years, have really come to a place where those big questions of why are we doing what we're doing, I think a lot of companies are sort of starting to embrace this concept that you talk about humanizing the workplaces. And I want to come back to, after Ingrid, of why maybe you think we've got so far away from the fact that we need to humanize workplaces. I mean, that's just a concept that's almost crazy on its own. As humans, we're not humaning, you know, like how did that happen? And why are we having to actually create work that's actually about being human when we are all human? Which is a funny, interesting concept on its own. But I'd love to hear your story, Ingrid, and how you've got to this place, and if there's any aha moments in your journey that have got you to where you are.
Sure. Tricky, isn't it, to summarize a life? So I'll just try and pluck things out. I guess, the strongest influence for me was as a young migrant. Although I was born in Australia, my parents were Italian. My dad had lived in Italy his entire life, and mum had migrated as a 12-year-old. So I lived her life a little bit. I lived her story. So, classic, I wouldn't even know whether to call myself first or second generation. Well, I prefer first. So when I turned 3 on the boat, on the Galileo Galilei that took me to Italy. So my first experience of language, of home, of family was really in Italy. I went to school there. I learned to read and write there. I felt the mountains there. I come from the north, the Biella, which is north of Torino, in the pre-Alpine country, bordering close to the borders of Switzerland and France. So very much mountain people. From a small provincial city, which, was made its name through high-end haute couture textiles. Lots of poor people working in factories and a few wealthy running the show. So very provincial. Anyway, we migrated back to Australia when I was 8 with my siblings and parents. And my parents really were always in business. They had one business after another, and I was always working with them from the age of 8. So I reckon I'm a merchant at heart and in the blood. And, that's tricky because I also had a social conscience and, how to reconcile the mercantile heart with the social heart. But I think I am doing that. I think I'm, when I was younger, I dichotomized. It was very much about you have to be one or the other. Now I recognize that the best version of ourselves is cruising that sweet spot between what you believe in, what you're good at, and what you love. And you can't ignore parts of yourself that you've inherited. And that you were, put on this earth really to realize. So my life has taken an interesting journey, but I think I've tried to always honor the parts of myself that I could at least recognize. Sometimes I couldn't recognize them for a while. I didn't meet those parts of myself until, I tried something and then that led me to something else. But look, in summary, I have always been drawn to the arts. I've always been a traveler. I've always been a little bit unconventional. I loved old homes and old things, and that might have just been because I wanted to, I remembered the Italian history, the buildings that I grew up among. So I, as a 17-year-old, went to uni and studied interior design and thinking that, it would be about designing buildings, but it really wasn't what I loved. I love buildings, but I don't love designing interiors. So and at the time, as a young person, I was ardent like Lucy and wanted to save the world and thought I could, stupidly. So I did 10 years of work in the at-risk sector, doing whatever I could. I mean, with an interior design degree, it's a bit tricky to work in the at-risk sector. So, you know, I worked as a missionary with Tim Costello, you know, working with the homeless. I worked with, you know, I used to go and give relief to nuns who ran a house for alcoholic Indigenous women. I worked with survivors of torture. I worked with suicide prevention initiatives, with national domestic violence initiatives. It's just everything. It took me all over the place. Always pretty badly paid, as usual, in that sort of sector when you're unqualified. Until eventually I married an Italian, Luca, from my town, Biella, and we, you know, eventually one thing led to another. We had 3 boys and moved to Castlemaine in central Victoria and started a cafe, which I'd always worked in hospitality, you know, on the side, and love hospitality because it's part of, you know, where I come from and who I am as an Italian, and really deeply believe in sharing food and wine and feasting and eating together as an expression of generosity that actually converts, you know. It's a force for change. And, you know, I'm the sort of person who would cite Babette's feast as the ultimate philosophical expression. You know, the idea of holding a great feast as a kind of ode to one's contribution to the world. So I ended up having a cafe, which we called Origini, which means origins in Italian. And then you'll notice later when I started the tour operations company, which is called In Giro, that's actually Origini, spelled backwards, and means going round. So the words are important because they speak to my origins, but also to my love of language and to the power of language. The other venture you spoke about, and there have been many in between, La Tavolata means the big table. So again, the same theme, where we did this my colleague and I, Carly Lauder and I did this pop-up in Annie Smithers restaurant. And that was really about, you know, how do we celebrate the table? And it was a great experience. It was 5 weeks, but it was great. In the meantime, from the cafe, that led to the tour operations company, and we can talk more about that later. I'll just give you a snippet now. But and in between, in order to make money and to, you know, take care of my family and to use the skills that I had, and probably also to utilize my love of learning and of interacting with people. I've always taught in the vocational education sector. So, you know, for the last 15 years, let's say, I've been teaching first interior design and decoration, residential design, and then most recently business in the prisons up here in the Central Victorian area. So first at Tarrangale Women's Prison and then at Loddon Men's Prison. And I still do that 1 day a week because it's a great thing to do. I love doing that. So in some ways, the threads are there: travel, Italy, food and wine, hospitality, working with people on the margins, and then a few other bits in between, which again we'll explore later. But in terms of aha moments, so many, of course, but I wouldn't mind doing a bookend of them. There's one that I can think of when I was maybe 14, 15, and I think it began the way that I continued to walk. And then perhaps most people professionally, probably in 2012 or so. So starting with the first one, I went to a girls' Catholic school in Eltham. And, you know, there were the popular girls and then there were, you know, the rest of us. And I wasn't unpopular. I was kind of like in the middle. I've always been a bit of a bridge, you know. And I remember we were allowed, you know, because we didn't have a lot in that school, we were allowed to have a radio when you got to year 10. So it was year 10, I think. So at recess and lunchtime, you could put the radio on. And I remember there was one girl, she was, you know, very popular. Her brother was a football star and, you know, she was attractive and whatever. And she was very confident. So, you know, recess would come on, she'd put on the radio and she'd be dancing, you know, which girls often dance, but you have to have courage to dance. Now, I'd been, you know, a student of ballet since I was 6. So I could dance. I loved dancing, but for whatever reason, I didn't have the confidence. I just didn't feel like I could do that. I could break the barrier of exposing myself in that way. And I remember seeing her name was Lisa. I remember seeing her dancing and thinking, I want that so much. I want to do that. And then doing it. Something snapped. And one day I did. I just joined in and danced and realized the world hadn't shifted on its axis and it all was fine. And I could now dance whenever I wanted and it would be fine. That changed the way that I am in the world. Now, if I want to do something, I do it. That's it. And usually it's for the better. And then it adds yet another layer of engagement with the world that I didn't have before I did it. The other thing that happened that was pivotal, I was traveling with Luca, my now ex-husband, and our 3 little kids. They were little at the time, now they're young adults, like Lucy's 15, 18 and 21. And we were in a place called Lago d'Orta, Lake Orta in the north, not far from my hometown. Beautiful, one of the most beautiful, this is a free tip to anyone who's into traveling to Italy. This is one of the most beautiful places you can ever go to and not many people know about it. Anyway, in Lago d'Orta, there was this folly. I call it a folly, but it was a villa built in the sort of Ottoman style. A merchant, a cotton merchant had come back 100 years earlier, had spent time in the Orient and decided that he wanted to live in a villa that was like an Ottoman palace. And it was one of those luxury, it's the best accommodation there. It was, 5-star luxury hotel. And, don't forget, I'm an interior designer. I love beautiful interiors. And, I've hardly got any money because I'm working in the at-risk sector and doing part-time work to be at home with the kids. And I said, let's go in. We'll ask if we can just go in and have a look in the foyer. So I walk in with my husband and 3 little kids and I say, I'm an interior designer from Australia and I love this place. And do you mind if I just look? And they were very gracious, as people working in 5 stars are generally. And I left and I said, again, similar to the Lisa moment, I said, one day I'm going to stay in this place, $500 a night, which now, I hardly blink at because that's the sort of sector that I operate in. But at the time seemed offensive, and I went away. And what happened in my brain, because I still couldn't justify spending that money. Even if I'd had it, I would have spent it on something else. I couldn't spend $500 on a night in a hotel when I could give it to the poor or, buy a new couch, which, needed replacing or whatever it was. But I said, I'm going to come up with a way of doing this. And the way that what I came up with is the business model that I continue to use, which is leverage what's around you to achieve what you want so that you can live fully. And what I recognize is that I could go to Italy every year, and at the time we couldn't afford it. I could go to Italy every year if I brought people with me who paid for it. And I would give to them what they needed in order for them to feel that they could come with me. And that was the beginning of my In Giro business. And, now it really provides me with most of my income. And I get to stay in palaces and castles, for several weeks, if not months of each year. And I still love it. And I love it as, in terms of experiencing beautiful and exceptional hospitality, in terms of experiencing beautiful and exceptional buildings, and also sharing that with the people, from Australia who don't have access to that, perhaps like I didn't. So that's kind of picking at things from my life, but it will give you an idea of who I am and how I operate.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. And there's so much in what you said. And I was just like listening really intently to everything because it was just so engaging. And I resonated so much with what you said. And I felt like in times you were talking about my life or how I want my life to be or my personality. And I'm thinking, oh, I got a kindred spirit here. So, yeah, thank you. That was beautiful. So back to you, Luce. I know we talked when you finished about this idea of humanizing and how we've got to that place of humanizing and why we need to start humanizing when we're all actually humans. And are we almost, I wrote a piece on this recently about, are we commercializing purpose? And do we all just have it within us? And it's like, obviously, people can help guide us and give us platforms or curate experiences to help us help us bring it out. But the fact that there's whole industry with workplace wellbeing around humanizing the workplace, it's interesting. I'd love to hear what you have to say about that.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Lisa. I feel like I should just contextualize perhaps at this point for listeners the reason why Ingrid and I have come together. I mean, just listening to you feels like it's such a great expression of the synergies between our work, although they have come from such different angles. So we're collaborating together to develop an experience in Italy around a personal spiritual development lens around this beingness piece of, and I guess you could call it purpose too, but I'll address that question in a minute. So a curated suite of activities that take in the tourism experience, but in the lens that you've just heard from Ingrid, which is a much more unique, I think, perspective on how to travel. And then a series of experiences around processes that I'll be designing to support people to really engage deeply with themselves in the context of the culture, the creativity, nature, and the experiences around them, and the group around them too. So just to kind of make sense of why we're sitting side by side for this conversation, I felt
thanks.
That's probably
I was going to bring that up, but I got so engrossed in what you were both saying that I forgot about.
That's a bit better. Thank you.
So thanks.
Your question about purpose, I'm really glad that you actually used that word, because it's a word I've been grappling with.
Yes.
This idea of commercializing purpose. And in fact, throughout my career, I've used different, I guess, words or lenses to probably reach for the same outcomes in the end, which is connection to self, connection to other, and connection to something deeper for ourselves. But I also began to feel that this word purpose was a bit bastardized, and in fact it was setting us up to trip and to fail, and it was just another product of this driven culture that we find ourselves part of and completely trapped in. And same with leadership. So I was running leadership development programs for many years, 25, nearly 30 years of leadership development work, and I love it. I actually love it, because what I love about it is that it's about self-responsibility, and it's about everything that Ingrid has just expressed about her own journey. That's where I come at when I'm talking about leadership. It's about boss of self and standing in your power, and taking, I guess, shared responsibility for the community or for the context or the workplace, or in whatever way you might be leading. However, I also feel that it's a trapping word that is very laden with cultural meaning, that has its essence in hierarchy, and hierarchy can be useful structurally to make things happen in organisations, but there's this hierarchy as kind of function, and then there's hierarchy as mindset and perspective, and that's where we trip ourselves up in workplaces, and that's where we end up dehumanizing our workplaces, and that's where we trip ourselves up in our own personal journeys too, because we place ourselves above or below others, and we make somebody or something better than where we're at currently, and therefore we're constantly reaching for what we are not or we have not, and therefore we never ever feel enough. And for me, purpose is that you can get particularly I think if you're a leaning in kind of a person who wants to strive to make a positive impact in the world, these are all coming from beautiful places and beautiful ideals and aspirations. So I would hate to think that anybody would think that I'm making any of these desires wrong. But the issue is that where we can go wrong is where we allow ourselves to believe that we couldn't quite be the full expression of ourselves or the best version of ourselves until we've done the next striving thing. So until we've done the next course or the next person, and I know really well about personal development investment. I've invested a lot in these things, and it matters a lot to me. It matters a lot to me because I want to be the best mum that I can be, and impact on my children with the fullest amount of self-awareness that I can bring to that relationship or my relationship with my other loved ones. However, I've noticed in myself over the years that I never, ever, ever feel like I've quite got there, that I've never quite got it, nailed it. And of course, there are different personality expressions of how people take up these things. But what I've noticed also in my work in workplaces, back to your question about humanising, is, I'll be brought in to run a emotional intelligence workshop, or a wellbeing workshop, or a leadership workshop, or a purpose workshop, or resilience. And it's all incredibly tick box, and it's all pointing the finger at the individual. So now I'm going to sound like I'm contradicting myself, because I believe very much in personal self-responsibility, but I also believe that the context that we're in can trip us up. So, you know, the organisation can sell a story about kind work culture or caring for their staff, or, you know, the resilience piece, but then structurally the whole organisation can be set up to trip you up at every step of the way. And it might not even be, it might be physical structural, as in, you know, expected working hours and contractual arrangements, or it might be cultural structural. So it might be the unspoken expectations in a workplace that mirror the unspoken expectations in ourselves that never, ever measure up.
Yes, I think we've actually had a little conversation on some of this before, and how it is, a lot of it, the change is not just about the individual and the humanizing us as people, but it is about the systemic changes that need to happen in order for us to be able to embrace our true human qualities and values.
That's right.
And
I used to, you know, consider myself a change agent. It's funny hearing you talk about the, you know, early 20s, we're all going to save the world. Well, it took me a long time to let go of that. And I can still see elements of it in the organisational development work that I do, where I'm still seeing where systems are broken and where people are being trashed, and where I think I can make a change. But increasingly my work is now about a much quieter inner space that we can bring to whatever environment we're in, whether it's workplace or personal relationships. You know, we were talking to an older retired couple about this tour, in fact, and they were hearing me articulate this, and maybe hearing that my background has been a lot around the workplace wellbeing and humanising workplaces space, and really it's about so much more than that for me. It's about how we, at whatever age and stage, show up in the world, and what legacy we leave, and what we attach value to. And I could go on and on about, you know, where the world is, where the whole, my belief that so much of the disquiet and the disruption in the world, the breaking systems, the breaking mental health, the breaking planet, come back to that inner state. And if we can just notice what shows up in us and how it plays out in us, and take responsibility for that bit, I feel that the rest can flow.
Yeah. So, yeah, the taking responsibility of ourselves is a huge one, and it sounds in so many ways quite simple, but you'd both know in different ways that it's not always such a simple thing to action. It's simple in a sentence, but when we have to integrate it into our lives and overcome the overwhelm or the stress or the circumstance or the company that we're working with, and we have this push-pull about staying or leaving, about, like you talked before, Lucy, about parenthood and that juggle between becoming a parent and the decisions of, again, that I think the theme for a lot of what's been said is sitting in that in-between space. You know, even to the extent, Ingrid, when you talked about in the schoolyard, and you were that in between space of two different circles, and which one did you step more into? And in the end, you sort of stepped into something because you're inspired by this so-called popular girl with confidence, and you stepped into that feeling you saw in her that you wanted to ignite in you, and this in-between space is something that I think often has so much power, but also traps us, because we have a foot in and a foot out. And I'm going through a lot of this at the moment as well. You know, like you, Luce, choosing, did I choose my career or did I choose my motherhood? And I kind of chose both, with the motherhood probably slightly in more priority, but the passion in the work stuff still always there, but never really reaching the potential or the desire. And now, like you both, having those kids that are that bit older and don't need you so much, where do you sit? And it is that sort of, I suppose, that middle-aged woman existential crisis. What do I want? Who am I? And how do I get there? And like you say in that beautiful quote, Ingrid, don't say I can't, say how can I? And
sorry, I wanted to say something because it's interesting. I think you have to, Lucy, battle with, you know, how do you interface with the system? How do you respond? How do you, you know, retaliate, whatever? Whereas I have the luxury of just setting my own path, and if people are attracted, they join me, and if they're not, they don't. But I have found that my path is attractive because it is a simple path, but it's a very audacious path.
Yes.
And the call, even though we do all operate in that pond, that in-between pond, we're never going to be one or the other entirely. I think the real question for me is one of identifying my values. It's really about identifying myself.
Mm-hmm.
Who am I? Why am I here? What am I here for? How can I be the most authentic expression of myself? This is it. This is the beginning and the end of every conversation that I engage in, all of my parenting, all of my, you know, tour guiding, all of my teaching, you know, and the obstructive element is fear. It's always fear. It's fear versus the authentic self. If all of us were our authentic selves, this world would operate more beautifully, more effectively, more powerfully. Fear obstructs that. And luckily, some people can turn fear into a learning opportunity and therefore turn the threat into an opportunity. But fundamentally, we have to be conscious, I think, conscious of the fear in ourselves and the fear around us. I think that's the root of empathy for ourselves and others. If I can see where you're frightened and why you're acting the way you are, if yesterday I lost it with my son who got into trouble at school, and then I felt bad, and I thought, why did I feel bad? Because I felt like a failure. I was frightened that my son's behavior signified my failure as a mother. That's why I lost it. And that wasn't the best expression. That wasn't honoring him. It wasn't honoring me, and we didn't resolve that well. That's okay. I'm at least aware. That's a start. We'll get it right next time. But I think that's you know, when people join me in Italy or you know, on a local retreat, like we do writing retreats, etc. When people join me, it's because they dare step into themselves, like I did when I stepped into the dance, you know. And there is so much power. They know it. You know, their instincts tell them, if I could just step into that, I will be more myself and things will be better. Simple. Like it's almost subconscious, right? And then they do, and I see them. They are just traveling, right? They're not doing anything for the world, but they are more fully themselves. They recognize themselves more. They like who they are, and they're more generous with the world. They're more generous with each other. The generosity factor is boosted, and all of a sudden there's overflow. This is not a science. This is simply people stepping into what they recognize as important within themselves. That's it. Yes. And at the other end of, you know, I have the great privilege of vacillating between, you know, the sort of the privileged sector and the, you know, marginalized. So I go to prison and I meet with 6 or 7, 8 men at a time, one day a week, and we talk about business opportunities and how to realize them. And, you know, clearly these men are obstructed. They're in a system that they haven't chosen to be in. They all have to wear the same clothes. They're not allowed to do what they want. They have to navigate mental health issues, drug dependencies, visitation limitations, etc. But they are turning up in my class. Already they're stepping into themselves. And I always tell them, you are so well placed to succeed in business because you've already dealing with obstacles on a daily basis and recognize that that is the path in business. So the fact that you are confronting just getting here, just getting yourself up on time, getting into this classroom, coming into this classroom and dealing with, exposing your needs, desires, wants, hopes with, to a group of men you may or may not know, is already the first step. And then what we do is identify the blocks. That's basically my teaching. What's stopping you from believing that this is possible? What have you done that isn't going to lead to where you want to go? What do you actually want from life? And I have this, I'll finish with this, but there was, so many stories, but one poignant one, several years ago, there was an Egyptian man of Egyptian origin. I think he was still an Egyptian citizen in the prison. I don't know why he was in there. Maybe it was fraud or something. Probably in his 60s. And we were doing an exercise in goal setting. And, I asked them to set short-term goals, which, the end of the short-term goal is their release date, whatever that might be. And just setting a release date is so challenging because they have, an earliest release and a latest release. And I asked them to pin down a reasonable release. And that's so confronting emotionally to go, when do I believe I can be free? Will the world meet me, or will it obstruct me? And what will I commit to in my dreams and in my heart? Anyway, so we were looking at short term, then midterm is 2 or 3 years after release, long term is 5 years or beyond, depending on their age. So I always start with a long term, but I only make them submit short and midterm. Anyway, long term, this guy goes, I don't have a long term goal. I think I want to die. And I said, and it was a very relatively positive man. He didn't seem depressed. And I said, okay, why do you want to die? And he goes, well, because we were talking about, what are our dreams? And he goes, well, my dream was to get married and have a family. And it's too late now. By the time I get out of prison, I'm not going to meet someone. I'm not going to be able to have children because she'll be too old to have children, blah, 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 if I meet someone. And it was so amazing. All these men, there were 6 or 7 men in the room, and they were all feeling for him and going, no, that's not true. You could meet someone. Look, why don't you go out and then just join the Egyptian club? There'll be some woman there who's already got kids who'll be looking for some. You're a good-looking man. You've still got... And everyone pitched in until he could see a shape for his dreams. He couldn't envisage that shape. So all of a sudden, we're writing it down. I've got my, my whiteboard marker, and I'm going, right, you're 65, or when you're 70, and then you'll go to the Egyptian club, and that'll take this long, and then this... And everyone's going, yeah, and you could do this, and you could do it. And there's internet dating for people your age. And it went on and on. and then I saw this guy. He was blooming. And it was over the course of 1 or 2 hours. And at the end of that session, I said, do you want to review the long-term goal? Do you really still think that it's impossible for you to achieve that goal? And he said, no, I can see how that can happen. Okay. Oh, sorry, I know why it started. He didn't want to die. I asked him, how long do you think how long do you think you'll live? He goes, I can't have long-term goals. I'm going to die at 65. I said, well, what do you mean you're going to die at 65? Well, there's nothing to live for once I get out of prison. And so after that, I said, look, do you really think you're going to die at 65? He goes, no, I reckon I could go to 80. So he basically revised his life expectancy by 15 years in that one class, simply because he understood that his greatest dream was possible, that what he had wanted to live for his whole life. And it wasn't about becoming successful, or, he'd had money in the past and he'd stuffed it up, and that's why he'd ended up in prison. But for him, for this man, an authentic life was one lived with a family. And that was his mission, and that was his purpose. And when he was able to hang on to that or believe in it, all of a sudden, his life was worth living, and he became a person with purpose and hope. And not only that, the people around him learned from that experience and contributed to that experience. It became a symbiotic experience. So I've learned that the most important thing, whether in the most privileged circles or the most underprivileged circles, is always to identify your dreams and to live them. And I always say, my authentic self and my vision and my mission and my purpose in life is to live fully. I've identified that. It's not everybody's, but, it took me till my 40s to get to that. But I know that to live fully will make sense of me and everything I touch. So I align with that. And if it doesn't align, then I acknowledge it's fear-based. Yeah. That's where I come from. So for me, it's not about, what's wrong with the system or how can I fix the system. For me, it's who are we and how can we be that person?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that if we all live like that, we would have a very different world. We would have a world where people weren't just projecting their stuff on everybody else because they would feel fulfilled and content and joy. And when you feel those feelings, you don't actually need to project outwards because you've got the power within. And yes, we would definitely be living in a very different society had everybody execute their birthright of inner power. And yeah, you know, hearing the way that you shared that and the passion behind it and the meaning and the your genuine belief in the words that you just shared was beautiful. And I think that you're right. And Lucy mentioned it right near the beginning, and you mentioned it some piece in there about this idea of values. And when we have a values disconnect, how nothing really flows all that well. And how when I work with people as well, because I do a lot of coaching, and a lot of the methods that you were talking about in the prison is very similar to a coaching, it is coaching. And yes, that idea of, really identifying and coming back to what's important to you, what are your values, what are your unique traits, what are your strengths, all those things. And then what do you need in order for, you can't really go for the needs brainstorm, I suppose, before you work out the values, and connect with yourself and the self-awareness of that to then go, all right, well, how do I make that happen? And I think that's the really hard piece. It's the
Sorry, Lisa.
It's that needs piece. It's very, very difficult to sometimes work out, well, what do I need in order to go from a noun to a verb? Values are verbs. They're not nouns. If we want to live them.
Yes.
And so it's that piece that I think would be great to hear from both of you, for the listeners that would also be struggling, like every other human on this planet at times, goes, how do we, some people are more advanced and some people less advanced with it, but how do we close that gap? How do we close that gap between the ideal and real? How do we actually bring these are my values, this is what I like, this is what I'd love to be doing, but how do I make it a reality? And I understand the fear-based stuff, like let's overcome the fear. But again, that could be also just a bit of words. And to really overcome fear, it's taking a lot of action, a lot of courageous action. And again, a little bit of buzzwords. How do we get away from these buzzwords and actually integrate these experiences and these concepts into our life every day?
Well, I think to use your language, moving from a noun to a verb is lovely, but I would like to add the adjective bit. To me comes from so much from the generosity in Ingrid's story. I mean, that you've articulated generosity in action in so many different ways through your stories. Yeah. It's abundant and it's beautiful. And what is also felt through your story, I think, is exactly that. It's symbiotic. You use the word symbiotic. It's interactive. We can't and we shouldn't be trying to do this stuff alone. We hold mirrors up for each other. So yes, we project our stuff onto other people, but we also can see clearly through other people's stories and experiences and support. And that's why I'm so passionate about group process is that we just plain storytelling, keep it simple, get all the theories and all the language and all the kind of expert stuff out of our heads and allow ourselves to be inexpert and authentic and storytellers and sharers and generous. And I think, I think the piece about the how to, or this is a bit cynical to start with, but, Brene Brown's got this great quote, if how to worked, we wouldn't be the most over-medicated, over-addicted, overweight, depressed population in human history. And I really believe that. We need to get out of our brains that want to construct the truth and fix it, and what's the pathway and how do I fix my broken self and we just need to walk in the world, live, notice ourselves, notice how nature works, notice all the things that nature can teach us about resilience and decay and you know, life and death and community and relationship and thriving and cycles. And there's actually a lot of science emerging about this now, neuroscience and psychological sciences. I follow the work of two amazing thinkers, Ian McGilchrist, who's a psychiatrist and a philosopher, and Lisa Miller, who's a psychologist. And Lisa's actually tracked the pathways in our brains that are kind of shut down in our dominant culture where everything has to be linear. And what that does to our brains is it overactivates a piece of our brain that then becomes this grasping, needy, never happy, never satisfied part. And it's like multiple intelligences. You know, we know that we've got more than one intelligence. We've got more than an intellectual intelligence. We've got emotional intelligence. We've got physical intelligence. Well, there's also spiritual intelligence, which is actually wired in our brains, and it's underdeveloped in our culture. And what her research has been able to show is that if we can activate that part of our brains more, and it just takes simple, pleasurable discipline. It's not like, you know, cracking the whip and taking yourself off to do endless push-ups. It's like go for a walk in the bush and notice the beauty around you, or listen to an amazing piece of music and immerse yourself in it and allow yourself to let yourself go. And if we develop that part of our brains, then we've got all these protective factors against anxiety, depression, addiction, all the things that are kind of trapping us. We can support our well-being in this generative, generous, symbiotic, beautiful way. And Ian McGilchrist's research is similar, if anyone's interested to follow. He talks about the science of the right and left hemisphere. And again, he says that our culture and society has become so left hemisphere dominant, which is all about the rational, linear, what you can control, what you can know for sure. And, you know, there's another whole podcast on the relationship of that to our workplaces, which is that we're all attached to needing to be able to count and measure everything. That's all left hemisphere thinking. But in fact, our right hemisphere has become underdeveloped. And what the right hemisphere can do is to put things in bigger picture, put things into context, understand nuance, understand that there are multiple lenses and perspectives and angles in viewing and understanding things, and that there is no one right way. The left hemisphere wants to fight for its way to be the only way and to be righteous. And again, that's where hierarchy comes in. The right hemisphere allows us to be whole humans, and we need to be whole humans in every context, but most particularly in relation to our relationship with ourselves. So if I could finish by saying anything, it would be, you are perfect just the way you are. You don't need to do anything more, anything else. Just show up and walk your dreams.
And now I need to add to that, because you see, this is where I don't know, maybe this is not, I hear that and it makes sense, but I'm the battleground between the left and right. You know, I'm that battleground, and I'm rational and I want to control, and I work budgets, you know, I know about business modeling, and I understand, you know, processes and project management, and I understand what is possible and not possible. And, you know, I have those left brain tendencies, and I'm also, you know, very, I don't know if that's the left brain. Is that the left brain? Yeah. And then the right brain tendencies are, you know, the more intuitive, and I go with that. And that, you know, rounds out some of my thinking. But what I have to say is that, and maybe I'm wrong here, but I'm going slightly away from where you've finished. I think there comes a time when you've recognized the blocks, you've recognized the fear, you know what needs to be done, or maybe you have an instinct, you're not sure, because to wait to be sure is a fool's game. You'll rarely know exactly until you take the step. Then you'll know whether it's going the right way or not. But you must take the step. You can't just sit back and wait for everything to happen. I mean, there might be a time when taking the step is not taking the step, but you still need to be conscious. You know, for example, it's easy for us as we're, you know, trying to fill the spots of this tour to get a little bit right. Let's go into a marketing frenzy. And then you watch your instinct and you go, is that reflective of the energy that we want this tour to operate in? And we go, no, time to step back and wait. You know, there's a time for that. But it takes courage to be authentic. And courage sometimes means taking a step. it was difficult for me when COVID came and I lost $100,000 in 4 tours in 5 minutes. And that was my year's income. That was a lot of work. And I wasn't allowed to travel for 2 years. I lost my business. And this is after having had to walk away from my previous business because of the marriage breakdown. So this was my second business to be blocked. And, you know, I took it personally. I was a victim for a while. I went in there and said, what's wrong with me that I can't sustain a business? And it took courage for me to say, I believe in this. I'm not going to let it die. I will do what it takes to keep it alive. This is not my fault. Or if it is, or if I've been a victim, I will own that and I will take a step into the biggest, best version of me. And it meant putting money where the mouth was, you know, it meant taking financial risks. It meant exposing myself. It meant believing even when I didn't think I was sensible to believe. So there's something to be said for sitting back, not that you were saying that, but for not overdoing and not over controlling. But there's also something to be said for, you know, take that step. If you're going to find yourself and it means going with me to Sicily or wherever, do it. If it means setting up that business, do it. If it's the men in prison, it means getting up and doing those laps around the compound so that you do lose the weight you said you want to lose. Or, you know, reaching out to that family member you haven't spoken to. It is about taking those steps. So I am proactive in that. I do believe that you have to tell the universe and tell the world and tell yourself, most importantly, I mean this. Yes. I mean to be authentic.
Oh, there is, you know, like you, Ingrid, who wanted to jump in 100 times when I was speaking. I wanted to jump in 100 times when you've both been speaking. But my role today is just to let you guys speak more. But there is so much in what you've both said. And I think that there's so much validity in what you've both said. And if I add to that, I think that we get given a right and a left side because they're both to be used. We're a human who's got both. And it's about this bridge between and finding that balance of which side is being connected enough with self to realize when one is being overpowering to the other and when we need to execute more of the other side, or a bit of like integration of both. The other things which came up was interesting when you were talking about everything being measured, and it's very timely because we are living in a society that is so about measuring everything. It is so much about the quantitative aspects of everything in our life, from the number of steps we're walking to the number of calories we're eating to the amount that this is, like, everything is becoming quantified. The more technology improves, the more quantifying we are of everything and our metrics. And we're being sold a story, and I'm not saying this story is completely untrue, but it's worth reflecting on for a lot of people, where we're sold this story that if we quantify everything, it will bring us more quality. Yeah. But actually, quality comes often from not quantifying things, like you said, Ingrid, and you said, Lucy, and just actually going out and being, and not measuring it all. So yeah, that's really interesting, and I do really agree that we need to take action in order to experience the quality to then get some clarity.
Yeah, if I can clarify, when I talk about being, I don't mean just sitting on a couch being.
Of course,
I mean the quality of the ways in which we show up and
in the world,
walking the steps, and the courage. And in fact, you know, that was lovely, because to me that articulates so beautifully the metaphor that we've chosen for our tour, which is pilgrimage. It's one foot in front of the other, you know, taking us.
And I think that also, Lucy, when you left with the comment of you're perfect the way you are, I also want to add to that and maybe agree but kind of disagree with it as well, in that maybe what we are is instead imperfect. And what we need to do is embrace our imperfections rather than believing that we're perfect, because nobody's perfect.
Yeah, notice how I reacted immediately. It's like, No, I don't think that.
I think the truth is that that's probably what you really meant, as in we're perfectly imperfect.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to add to that as well. And one other part of my notes, because I was scrambling notes as you're both speaking, because there was so much gold and wisdom in what you both said. But one of my favourite, I suppose, quotes with Maya Angelou about mission and purpose, and I suppose I've adopted it, is the definition of success. And she says the definition of success is liking who I am, what I do, and how I do it. And that is it. Yeah. And that was so resonant to what you shared, Ingrid, about, you know, when you were sharing all of that gold. And I think that is a big essence, that definition of success from Maya Angelou.
I love that, Lisa. I was going to say that too, actually, after you shared. I was going to say, well, it all depends on how we define success. And I saw that quote on your website this morning, and I was like, that is gold. I love it. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I suppose maybe in some of the closing moments, we can talk about an idea that you talked about in your recent TED Talk, which we haven't really mentioned, but recently you did a fantastic TED Talk, and I'll put the link to it in the show notes. But you mentioned the idea of taking ourselves and others by the hand and saying enough is enough. So could you elaborate on what kind of leadership looks like in this practice and how it can inspire positive change?
Yeah, wow. Well, thanks, Lisa. That's kind of feels like it's opening another whole big conversation, but really where I was coming from again, and it probably just brings together everything I've said today, is that I feel that some of the mess that we're in personally and in our systems and organisations and on the planet is to do with this fundamental internal voice that we're not enough, and that therefore we need to have more, do more, and be more. And the opposite, I believe, might be the simple kind of truth that we've been striving to reach in our conversation today. So it's countercultural, actually. It's inviting us to step off the acculturation that possibly your audience relates to, because I'm not suggesting that the whole world relates to it by any stretch of the imagination. That this yearning, this understanding, this intuition that we haven't quite nailed. We've been sold something about what success looks like, and we're not feeling it. You know, it doesn't.
So just to conclude, what little tools or tips could you give to somebody who agrees with everything that you're saying, would love to live like that, but is still grasping to the story that way is easy for others but so hard for them because of their circumstances, or the fact that they need money to pay the bills, or they're so caught up in certain beliefs or a system or a family dynamic, or, you know, without uprooting their entire life, which some people may choose to do, but it's not like we're encouraging everybody to necessarily do that today. What are some tips and tools that you could suggest that are pragmatic to actually get people to start on this journey and feel that they are capable of that regardless of their circumstance?
Lucy, do you mind if I respond quickly, and then you can? Few things, because I could easily identify with the people who are obstructed. You know, I'm having to make a living. I'm a single mum to 3 teenage boys. I don't have a buffer. I have huge mortgage. I have 2 mortgages. You know, like I have some trauma issues that I'm dealing with from my youth. Got a broken relationship too behind me. You know, so life has been tricky, and I've taken a hit. I've taken a couple of hits. The last, 8 years have been very hard. It's not the hardest, and I'm lucky, so I have resources. It hasn't been an easy ride, and I've struggled with anxiety and a whole lot of stuff. I think the thing that has helped me the most, other than probably having people around me, and I haven't always felt like I had people around me, even though they probably were, I've often felt alone. The thing that's helped me most has been walking, believe it or not. Simple physical exercise that uses both sides of my body and is outdoors, and it has saved me. Sometimes I go for very long walks, 60 kilometers on my own for several days. Sometimes I just walk for half an hour. And not all the time, and it's, you know, whenever I can manage it. But invariably, it helps. So if nothing else, that helps. The other thing that I find is absolutely critical, and everyone can do it, and that's because I believe that we are intuitive and we can trust our intuition, is we need to find a way to tap into that intuition, because we always know what to do. Sometimes we think we don't know what to do, but we always know. And the way we can check what to do, because of course I still, you know, the mandate is you should do something, anything, even if it's wrong. A step is better than no step. If you're stuck, you've got to take a step, otherwise you will remain stuck. So even if it's the wrong step, doesn't matter, take it. It'll lead you somewhere. But the way to work out which step should I take, I don't know, that's why I'm stuck. Often it's just such a simple exercise, and maybe it was being flippant, I'm not sure. But I ask the question, for example, should I quit my job or not? Right, which is a big one. I've had to ask myself that question. Should I give up an extra day at the prison or not? I kind of need the money. I'm only making $400 a week, you know, like I need the money. But I hate this bit, or I hate that, whatever it is. I ask myself the question, I go, and I try not to stay in the head, I try to stay in the heart. I go, should I quit the job? And then I notice, do I feel disappointed or relieved? And then I quickly ask the opposite. I'm not going to quit, or tell myself the opposite. I'm not going to quit the job. And I check, am I disappointed or am I relieved? If it's a bit unclear, I just do it again. I'm just not paying enough attention to my guts. And doing that will tell you what you want to do, because clearly you need to go with the relief feeling, not the disappointed feeling. So you have to check both. Just because we're a bit slow, we go, what if this happens? And then I go, disappointed, relieved. And then I do the opposite. What if this happens? Disappointed, relieved. And then I have to have the courage to step into the relief, because my gut knows what's best for me. And though my brain mightn't, my gut does. And it takes courage to believe in that. You have to trust yourself. But when you do it enough, you start to see that every single choice you make based on the relief actually was the best choice. And I know that. I can 100% guarantee that that is the case. That's what works for me. I don't know if that's pragmatic enough, but
I reckon that's super pragmatic. I don't feel like I've got much to add, actually. In fact, you almost literally took words out of my mouth.
It's like we are together.
And yeah, so back to nature and walking. Yeah, I walk also. That's definitely been a strategy for me always, and on so many levels. It stills, it clears, it gives perspective. It calms the nervous system. It connects us to nature.
The only thing that I might add for people that I do is that I do something I call a stroll for the senses and the soul.
Oh, similar.
And so when I go out, I don't know the direction that I'm going to walk. I might have driven to a particular location, or I might have just walked outside my front door. But either way, I don't make a route. I just walk and let my legs take me. When we get to an intersection, for whatever reason, I turn left or right. But before I leave, I set out an intention of the walk. And then I let the intention go. And then I let every sense be ignited. So from really looking to smelling the roses, to feeling what taste is in my mouth, to just everything. And so often you see signs that you've walked past every single day, and a sticker's been on the, say, stop sign of a word, and you've walked past it every day and never noticed it. But that day you noticed it because it was a clue to maybe something that you'd set out on the intention. and just listening to the whispers and being in my body as much as I can. Obviously, by walking, that helps. So I sort of try to combine the two of those a little bit, and I seem to really enjoy that. I can't say I get the answers every single time, but it definitely is helpful.
Yeah, and I think, we've actually all touched on the senses, and I think that if I could suggest anything, it would be is just offer yourself opportunities to tune into and cultivate senses that you don't necessarily use a lot in your day-to-day life. And another big one for me has been bodywork massage. I'm a trained bodywork practitioner, and it is profoundly powerful for shifting and moving energy and supporting well-being.
Yeah. Brilliant, ladies. Thank you so much for sharing your stories, your lessons, your wisdom. It's been absolutely beautiful, and I hope that everybody listening has gained some gold from both what Ingrid and from Lucy have shared and the little bits that I've added. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope you have too. So
thank you, Lisa.
Oh, absolute pleasure. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please share it with your friends and consider subscribing to the Wellthy Living podcast on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. I'm Lisa, a facilitator and coach for life, leadership, and wellbeing. To find out a bit more about my services, you can visit my website at wellthyliving.com.au, wellthy.living.com.au, or you can connect with me on any of my social media channels. So until next time, remember, connection is medicine.